So I think we'll make a start. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Good morning to those of you in the North America, the Western Hemisphere. Good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good evening to those of you in Central Asia. So today we're going to be talking about the Central Asia Migration Tracker, which was released, a new data set on migration, or amalgamated data set on migration that was released earlier this week. The event is sponsored by the Oxus Society for Central Asian Affairs, a new non-profit research-focused organization focused on Central Asia, which I am president. Talk a little bit at the beginning about the organization, some of our recent work, and some of our future plans. So as well as launching this week the Central Asia Migration Tracker that we'll be talking about today, last week we launched the Scholars of Central Asia database. This is a database of non-fiction books written in the social sciences and humanities by authors from the region, from Central Asia. So at present we have, I think, something like 120 entries in English, in Russian, in local languages, written in a range of topics ranging from feminism to the history of the steppe to legal pluralism in Central Asia. We're planning on adding more books. In fact, there's a way you can submit recommended books through the website right at the top, as Ben is showing to us. If you see an entry that's missing or know of an entry that's missing. So we've already received and found something like 50 books that we've missed that we will add going forward. So in keeping with our philosophy and approach, we want this to be a collaborative project. So we rely upon our audience to give inputs on books that we need to add to this database. So we're continually updating it as new material comes out and as we discover more books that we weren't aware of before. So certainly it's a work in progress, but go and check it out, explore. And the goal behind this was really to increase the visibility of local scholarship, increase the number of citations. So with that in mind, the next plan going into the new year is to create a similar database for articles, probably initially launching with just articles in English, but creating a database of articles written by or co-authored by authors from the region. So we're hoping that that will be going live into the new year. Coupled with that, we've also just completed a new data set on military exercises. So we'll be releasing that. It's a database of 253 military exercises involving the Central Asian militaries and external partners that we'll be releasing in the new year, along with a report. And we are also collecting data on transnational repression, the targeting of exiles by the Chinese government. So the targeting of exiles mostly from Xinjiang or East Turkestan. So that's another project that we're working on that we'll be releasing in the new year. So we have quite a lot going on. We've also recently launched the virtual Oxus Circle, which is a membership organization for those who are interested in the region. And our first event will be Trivia Night, both Trivia Night on December 27th, which will be in the very early morning in Washington, in the evening in Central Asia, the afternoon in Europe, and a second Trivia Night on the 29th that will be in the evening in North America. So please check that out, come along, join in. It should be, we hope, a lot of fun. So today we're going to be talking about the Central Asia Migration Tracker. And so we're going to be having a presentation by the authors of the report. And this really was their idea. This emerged, I think, as Sher will talk about, came from some research that he was doing for an article. And then we decided we would try and build it out into a full data set. So Sher will talk a little bit about some of the limitations of the data, the methodology. But as with all of our other data sets, we are humble and very aware of the limitations of what this data can say and what this data can tell. But I think it's hopefully a useful resource because it's an amalgamated data set based on official statistics on migration from various sources covering the period 2016 to 2019 and covering the EU, US, Canada, Japan, Korea, and Russia. We're hoping to continue to build on this, continue to build going backwards, continue to obviously add data as it's released, and hopefully as we find the data expand to other countries, obviously the two countries that are missing that have the most significant Central Asian populations of Turkey and China, where data does not appear to be available, but we're open, obviously, to would like to expand the database to those countries going forward. So we're going to have 4 speakers today, and they're going to take us through the tracker and sort of some of the preliminary findings in the 5 Central Asian republics. So we're going to hear from Sher Khashimov, who is a recent graduate of Indiana University and working with the Oxus Society, a native of Tajikistan. He has a number of recent reports, including a very interesting report yesterday that you should all read in Kabar about digital vigilantism in Tajikistan, which we should definitely check out. So we're also going to hear from Kymbat Nuranova, who is also working with the Oxus Society, a recent graduate of Penn State University, and an employee of Süleyman Demirel University in Almaty, where she joins us from today. And we're going to hear from Zhibek Aisarina, who is an MA student, a master's student in Eurasian Studies at Nazarbayev University, and is joining us from Astana or Nur Sultan. And finally, we're going to hear from Raushan Zhandayeva, who is currently a PhD candidate at George Washington University here in Washington, DC, and is originally from Kazakhstan. So this is our fantastic research team, and so they're going to take us through the findings. And then I see in the audience a number of prominent experts on migration, so hopefully we can have a good dialogue and discussion and sort of talk about ways in which we can, turn this into a resource that's useful for everyone and sort of develop it going forward, because that's very much our approach, to be collaborative. So with that, I'll turn it over, I think, to Sher to introduce the methodology and sort of why we decided to focus on this topic.
Thank you so much, Ed, for this introduction, and hello everyone who joined us today. So yeah, a quick word on methodology of our study before we jump into country-by-country findings. We decided for this study to focus on long-term migration that we defined as trips of 6 months and longer for the purposes of work, study, residence, and asylum outside of Central Asia. Short-term employment study programs or tourist trips were thus excluded from our dataset. Now, the first report that we published yesterday focuses primarily on labor, study, and residence. We decided to exclude analysis of asylum for now. However, it's an important topic that we plan to cover in a separate report in the future. Now, because Russia remains the main destination for migrants from Central Asia, that's an expected finding. Availability of Russian data informed the limitations of data from the rest of the receiving states that we decided to include in our study. Now, Russia restructured their migration system back in 2015, which meant that the data was limited only to the period between 2016 and 2019. So the countries that have detailed work, study, and residence migration data for that same period, namely the United States, Canada, the European Union, South Korea, and Japan, we included those countries in the data set. Other countries that are known to have large Central Asian diasporas, namely China and Turkey, were unfortunately excluded from the data set because they just don't have the adequate detailed migration data for the period that we were looking at. Now, we realized that by defining migration in a certain way and focusing on certain visa categories, we create certain limitations on our study. Inability to include China and Turkey is obvious and a big one. For example, by focusing on official long-term migration gleaned from clear-cut visa categories, we can account for informal activities and unofficial migration, which is a big part of migration from Central Asia. For example, students who engage in paid work instead of studying, or migrants staying past the visa expiration date, which both are very substantial issues when we're tracking migration to Russia, for example. Now, we also had to rely on clear and cohesive migration policy and consistent data collection by migration authorities. Tracking migration to Russia, for example, can be difficult and frustrating because the country has an inconsistent migration policy, and there are constant shifts between different agencies when it comes to handling the migration data. All of that to say is that academics and analysts using our trackers should be aware that it is by no means a comprehensive data set, but it is intended to demonstrate patterns of migration throughout the region. That said, I think we could now jump to our country by country findings, and we're moving on to Kazakhstan first.
Thank you, Sher. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to touch about some interesting findings regarding the migration situation in Kazakhstan. Overall, we have an interesting situation here. Not surprisingly, Kazakhstan has witnessed a negative net migration flow. So in the past 10 years, the number of people leaving the country was 70,000 more than people entering. One of the most effective strategies to boost immigration to Kazakhstan has been the Oralman program, which is a repatriation of ethnic Kazakhs, mostly from China and Uzbekistan. So from 1991 to 2020, the program has brought over 1 million ethnic Kazakhs. The government highly encourages repatriation and provides Oralmans with necessary social benefits such as healthcare, housing. However, Oralmans are considered to be one of the most vulnerable social groups due to cultural adaptation, due to language barriers. As we know, they don't usually speak Russian. So to avoid a negative meaning of the word Oralman, which means the returnee, the government gave them a new name, which is translated to Kandas, which means a tribesman. Another migration boost happened due to the growing popularity of Kazakhstan as a labor migration destination. I'm sure my colleagues are going to touch upon that more. Although the net migration still remains to be negative. As we know, labor migration is not usually associated with Kazakhstan. Nevertheless, we start witnessing a growing number of labor migrants from Kazakhstan. Russia, the European Union, and the US remain the top countries to issue work visas. And so in 2016 to 2019, according to our data, in Kazakhstan, work migrants tend to migrate for the purposes of searching for high-skilled occupation, and Kazakh citizens leaving are mostly professionally qualified. Interesting destination to highlight is South Korea. Two countries, so Kazakhstan and South Korea, established a 30-day visa-free regime in 2014, and consequently, the number of illegal immigrants from Kazakhstan has increased. So in 2014, we see a number of 359 migrants, and in 2020, we see that number increase to almost 40,000, 12,000 of which are illegal migrants. In terms of study, Kazakhstan government actively supports and promotes international education experience. So we have different mobility programs. We have the famous, a well-known Bolshak scholarship founded by the Ministry of Education, and it sponsored over 11,000 students since its establishment in 1993. The most popular destinations for Kazakh students are Russia and China, and we unfortunately do not have data on China. So we see that 83% of students go to Russia and China. So an interesting topic that we did not include in our report is a green card lottery. So around 40% of green cards issued in the US come from the diversity visa program. Compared to other countries such as Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, the participation rate in the green card lottery in Kazakhstan is relatively low. And around, in 3 years from 2016 to 2019, around 300,000 applications were received and only 1,775 visas were issued. So we only have a very low success rate of 0.5%. In terms of asylum applications, we see a 143% increase. The top 3 destinations for asylum applications include, again, South Korea, the US, and Sweden. Interesting country, I'm going to talk about Sweden. So a Kazakh community in Sweden was founded in the 90s by ethnic Kazakhs relocated from Turkey in search for jobs. Relatively large Kazakh community and accessible Swedish migration policy towards refugees caused a higher number of applicants from Kazakhstan. So there was a famous case of Sayragul Saudbay, an ethnic Kazakh, who fled from China in 2019, I believe, and she was rejected an asylum in Kazakhstan, so therefore she had to relocate to Sweden. So, to conclude, in the COVID-19 has already affected migration flow in Kazakhstan. So almost 11,000 people have left Kazakhstan from the beginning of 2020, which is 45% less than in the first 6 months of 2019. President Tokayev has highlighted the importance of labor migration, but still no serious actions were taken to identify underlying issues leading to a large flow of immigrants. I'm going to hand it over to Zhibek to talk about Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you. So in Kyrgyzstan, poverty and chronic unemployment are the main two factors that motivate the population to leave the country, to emigrate from the country. Especially poverty is the most prominent factor. For example, in 2018, the poverty rate reached to 22.4%, with 45% of the population, of all the poor population, comprising of the households headed by the unemployed males. Overall, it can be said that rural population is the biggest contributor to sending labor migrants abroad. For example, in 2018, 79% of all labor migrants from Kyrgyzstan came from the rural areas. Overall, in case of Kyrgyzstan, migration contributes one of the biggest shares to the country's GDP. It consists of, it contributes 1/3 of the GDP. Overall, every migrant sends around $3,000 to Kyrgyzstan every year. And situation with unemployment, it improved starting from the independence years. However, the rising unemployment among the youth is the main motivator that drives the young population to go abroad and to seek employment and to earn income in order to send the money in the form of remittances to their family residing in Kyrgyzstan, because of the fact that the state is unable to provide an adequate safety net in Kyrgyzstan. Russia remains the main destination for work. Of course, the number of Kyrgyzstani citizens who indicated work as their purpose of entry to Russia increased by 25,000 people in the given period. However, as it can be seen from the data from the table, in 2018, the number of people who indicated work as their main purpose of entry, it decreased. It experienced a dramatic decrease, and this was like a historical low number since the disintegration of the Soviet Union. And it has to be said that the main purpose, as already Kymbat indicated, Kazakhstan became a second top destination for work for the Central Asian migrants. And also overall economic stagnation in Russia contributed to this dramatic decrease. Among the EU countries, interestingly, apart from the like Italy, Germany, and countries like Poland, who are like popular destinations for work, Czechia and Slovakia gained popularity as destinations because these countries rising demand for cheap, unskilled labor from the post-Soviet countries. South Korea also had received an increasing number of Kyrgyzstani labor migrants, and this was within the framework of the employment permit system, which is a temporary work permit system administered by the South Korean government. However, in 2018, the South Korean government had to introduce restrictions to visa issuance procedures because, as already Kymbat mentioned, in 2018 there were increasing numbers of labor migrants, but this time from Kyrgyzstan, and there were around 4,000 people, out of which 1/3 were illegally residing or working in South Korea. And as it can be seen from the table, in 2019, already the number of work visas decreased by 200. Educational migration is also an important avenue for the Kyrgyzstani labor migrants, especially the young population, to live and get good quality of education, and subsequently to get a permanent residence permit abroad. In Kyrgyzstan, unclear prospects for employment after education, and the skills mismatch that flow from bad quality of education, they motivate the young population to leave the country. Overall, the number of study visas increased by 10,000 in the given period, which shows the increased interest of the population to study abroad. The top destinations for studying were EU, Japan, Russia, of course, the first, and EU and Japan. Apart from popular cities in Russia like Moscow and St. Petersburg, one of the most popular cities were Kostroma and Tomsk because of the geographical proximity of these destinations. And among the EU countries, Germany, Czechia, France, and Hungary were the countries that issued the biggest amount of study visas to Kyrgyzstani citizens. In the reported period, Russia and EU, two countries, they accounted for 95% of all permanent residence permits issued to Kyrgyzstani citizens. Permanent residence permits in Russian case, they present a streamlined process of gaining citizenship, gaining the Russian Federation citizenship, because Kyrgyz Republic signed an agreement with the Russian Federation in 1999. According to this agreement, the Kyrgyzstani citizens can apply for citizenship and then receive an answer to their application within a 3 months period, which is a very shortened period compared to other Central Asian countries. Overall, one biggest observation about the migration trends in Kyrgyzstan is the fact that the Kyrgyzstani government continues to see migration and the labor migrants that it sends to other countries as an excess population and as a labor export. And this explains the country's inability to provide safety and overall social services for its population abroad. Thank you. I hand on to Sher.
Thank you, Zhibek. Moving on to my native Tajikistan. Tajikistan is both one of the poorest countries in the post-Soviet space and one of the fastest growing countries in the Eurasian region. The unemployment rate currently stands at 10%, with 20% of youth being unemployed. 30% of the country's population is malnourished, and so all of these dire economic conditions are pushing people to look for a better life outside of the country. Over the reported period, the growth in Tajik migration is absolutely staggering. Most of it is accounted for by migration to Russia. In 2016, around 830,000 Tajiks registered for work with Russia's migration authorities. By 2019, that number grew close to 1.2 million. And that's only the official number. Some estimates put the number of Tajiks working in Russia at over 1.3 million, with at least 40% of them working there illegally. The figures for other destinations for Tajik labor migration are pretty negligible compared to Russia, although the number of Tajiks who received a work permit in the EU did triple between 2016 and 2019. Moving on to educational migration, Tajikistan has the lowest preschool net enrollment rate in the region, and the level of education of older generations in Tajikistan is currently higher than that of its youth, which is a discouraging sign for the country's future, and it reflects how crippled the country's education systems are at the moment. So it's not surprising that the number of Tajiks pursuing education abroad almost doubled over the report period. Almost all of that growth is accounted again by migration to Russia. A finding that surprised me personally was the number of Tajiks studying in Japan, which grew from 113 in 2016 to 159 in 2019. Educational migration to Japan is unconventional destination, I think, for a Tajik mind. Usually Tajiks head to countries like Russia, China, Turkey, and Kazakhstan. Like with the previous two categories of migration, Russia accounts for most of the growth in the number of Tajiks who sought residence abroad. That number went from 52,000 to 77,000 over 4 years. Over the same period, 132,000 Tajiks received a Russian citizenship. Now, Russia attracts Tajiks because of the dual citizenship agreement between the countries and because of Russia's resettlement programs that offer a streamlined citizenship process to those who are fluent in Russian, in addition to being qualified in a high-skilled, high-demand profession like being a doctor or an engineer. Over the same period, the number of U.S. green card applications more than doubled from 12,000 in 2016 to 28,000 in 2019, although those numbers are slightly inflated because U.S. green card lottery is an interesting phenomenon in Tajikistan. Tajikistan has a U.S. consular office where you can receive a visa. However, if you intend to migrate to the United States, if you need to apply for a green card visa, you have to go to Almaty or Nur Sultan for that and spend a week there dealing with that. And because most people cannot afford that, they apply for the U.S. green card lottery without the intent to migrate. And yet the green card lottery is widely popular in Tajikistan. It's essentially seen as an attempt to check one's own luck. Moving on to asylum, Tajikistan has the second largest number of asylum seekers, over 10,000 applicants, and in that category, Tajikistan trails only to Kazakhstan in this category. 3,700 of those applications were filed in 2016 in the aftermath of a major government crackdown on the opposition in late 2015. As many of you probably know, the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan and the Group 24 movement were declared terrorist and extremist organizations, respectively, banned, sparking a wave of arrest of opposition politicians and activists. Since 2016, the annual number of applications has gone down significantly, cut down by half to just 1,800 in 2019, which is interesting. Along with Turkmenistan, Tajikistan is the only country in the region to see a downward trend in asylum applications over the report period. And as I mentioned earlier, the asylum migration is the topic that we plan to cover in subsequent reports for the Oxus Society. Moving on to Turkmenistan. Tracking migration from Turkmenistan is fascinating and extremely difficult. The government is so untransparent and there's no independent media in the country. And so we don't even know precisely what the population of Turkmenistan is. The current educated estimate is that it stands at 5.5 million people. However, the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty investigation based on State Statistics Committee's unpublished data indicates that between 2008 and 2018, over 1.8 million people have left Turkmenistan for good, likely fleeing dire economic conditions and a repressive regime in the country. Now, the exodus is so bad that the Turkmenistan government has been trying to hold migration by preventing citizens from getting on flights and forbidding citizens younger than 40 from leaving the country. The routes to Turkey are watched especially closely because it's the most popular destination for Turkish citizens, and that's where the inability to include Turkey in our data set comes in. By some estimates, over 500,000 Turkmens reside in Turkey, many of them remaining in the country illegally for work past the expiration of the 1-month visa-free period. Russia isn't as popular of a destination for Turkmens as it is for other Central Asian states because Turkmen citizens are required to have a visa to enter Russia, which is why only 11,000 Turkmen citizens registered with Russia's migration authorities for the purpose of work over the reported period. Turkmen citizens are also not well prepared for labor migration to Russia, since the country switched from Cyrillic to Latin alphabet in 1993, and since then continued de-emphasizing Russian in the education system, which in turn hurts the labor migrants' prospects of landing a job in Russia. The Turkmenistan government has been attempting to hold educational migration as well. Despite the lack of domestic educational capacity, the government refused to recognize foreign diplomas between 2004 and 2014 for an entire decade to discourage Turkmen citizens from studying abroad. In 2009, in the middle of that decade, only 2,700 Turkmen citizens left to study abroad. By 2019, 5 years after the government started recognizing foreign diplomas, the number of Turkmen citizens studying in Russia alone jumped to almost 50,000 people. However, in the past 5 years, the Turkmenistan government made several additional attempts to halt educational migration. In 2015, the government decided that young men who have not yet served in the country's military will no longer be able to leave the country to study abroad. In 2019, the government announced that it will only recognize diplomas from certain foreign universities and won't even recognize certain degrees of study. The current list of approved foreign universities includes a dozen schools in Russia, India, and China, but only 2 in Kazakhstan, and not a single university in Europe, the United States, or Canada. This sort of constant uncertainty, as you can imagine, severely limits Turkmen citizens' ability to migrate for educational purposes. Turkmenistan has by far the lowest figures in the region when it comes to relocating in search of residence or asylum. Out of over 700,000 US green card applications that were filed in 2016 in Central Asia, only 5,000 were filed by Turkmen citizens. In 2019, out of almost 1 million US green card applications, only 8,000 were filed by Turkmen citizens. Again, all this data highlights how difficult it is to migrate from Turkmenistan, and making any predictions about the future of migration from Turkmenistan is difficult because of the unpredictability of the country's regime. The recent protests by Turkmen expats reportedly made the government very unhappy, and it's likely that the government will use that as a pretext to halt migration even further. And now we're moving on to Uzbekistan.
Thank you. When it comes to Uzbekistan, I would like to highlight 3 key migration trends that we can observe during the last 4 years. The first has to do with a change in migration policies. Since 2016, Mirziyoyev administration introduced both economic and political reforms, and migration policies were not an exception. The most important step in this sense is the acknowledgement from the administration that migration represents an important issue for the country. And this change in attitudes is reflected in a set of policies, including elimination of internal visas for traveling abroad, empowerment of the Agency for External Labor Migration, and creation of a fund that supports the interest and rights of Uzbek labor migrants abroad. The most notable policy, however, is the start of formal negotiations with Russia on easing bureaucratic hurdles on both sides to sort of accommodate temporary labor migrants in Russia, including language training, which sort of represented a really important barrier for Uzbek migrants. And while it's not clear for now where these policies will actually lead, the fact that migration is on the government agenda and the government actually takes some proactive steps towards that is already significant on its own. The second trend has to do with work visas. Many people on this call are probably aware that Uzbekistan is a labor surplus country, so its citizens have to look for the opportunities abroad. Their economy is sort of dependent on remittances, not as much as Tajik or Kyrgyz economy, but roughly 10% of its annual GDP comes from remittances. Russia obviously constitutes the overwhelmingly attractive destination for Uzbek labor migrants. And as you can see in our table, out of 7.4 million visas issued in the last 4 years, the ones that we have in our table, 7.37 million came from Russia. This number is obviously understated because of the number of informal Uzbek workers working in Russia. So that sort of indicates that Russia is also dependent on Uzbek migrants, as about 45% of all the permits that Russia issued, they were done to Uzbek migrants. These facts are sort of well known, but what's surprising about this table is, as the others have mentioned, how important and significant South Korea has become as a destination for labor migration. We obviously don't have Turkey here, and we assume that Turkey probably has more Uzbek migrants than South Korea, but South Korea still roughly has the same numbers as the entire European Union, which is significant. And that has to do with South Korean government policies. In 2004, they opened its labor markets for foreign nationals with Korean heritage. And we know that Uzbekistan has a large Korean diaspora. So a lot of them probably might have taken this opportunity. Furthermore, South Korean government also has signed a range of bilateral agreements, labor agreements with 16 countries, including Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, on sort of promoting labor migration to the country. If you look at the permanent residence visas table, you can also see a similar trend there. The overall number of permanent residence visas given to Uzbek citizens has declined over 4 years, but the number for South Korea sort of goes to the other direction. This is a trend common across all Central Asian countries, and scholars interested in this region should probably take a note of that. The final trend that I would like to focus on is also related to permanent residence, but here I want to specifically focus on the US. Green card lottery, as Sher has mentioned before, is sort of is a golden ticket for many Uzbek families. And Uzbekistan leads in the number of entries, not only in Central Asia, but globally. For example, in 2019, we had 876,000 entries. To put this into perspective, neighboring Kazakhstan had about 27,000 entries, and Tajikistan had about 28,000 entries. That's a large gap. What's interesting that despite the rhetoric surrounding immigration and some tangible steps that the Trump administration has taken, the intent to migrate has not decreased. So in 2016, we had about 690,000 entries, and that number grew to as I've mentioned before, 876,000 entries. However, what has changed and what has declined is the percentage of visas actually processed. It decreased from 71% in 2017 to just roughly 23% last year. And this is sort of might be indicative of broader US immigration policies. That's it from me. Thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to the excellent presenters for producing such a wonderful and very useful report data set, which is available on our website to download. So you can look at the spreadsheets with the numbers themselves. And as Ben was showing during the presentations, we also have an interactive map where you can sort of toggle through the different years, the different categories, and see how the flows have been changing. You can also download the code book, which has more details on the 4 categories that we've included within the report, that the team has included, and the rationale for that and some of the ways in which we've classified different visa types in the different countries. So that's all available for everyone. As we said, we're looking to build this going forward, expand to different countries, obviously add data as it's released. We sort of touched upon the theme of COVID during the presentations, but obviously we would assume once the data for 2020 becomes available, we'll be putting out another report, I hope, where the major theme will be probably the reversal of the trends that we've been talking about, because I think in the overarching sort of message from the presentations, as well as all these very interesting sort of individual country findings in specific categories, is sort of an increasing reliance on migration, that's even like is outpacing the growth of the population. So I think in all these different categories we're seeing in most cases an increasing reliance on migration that's obviously being reversed by the pandemic. We also have a report from Oxus Society authored by Professor Schenk, who I believe is in the audience, from Nazarbayev University, along with some of our other researchers on COVID-19's impact on migration in Central Asia, that will be published by the US Institute of Peace sometime in the new year. So that's sort of going to sort of start to explore some of these themes. What impact is the falling migration going to have on the region? So with that, I'll turn it over to the Q&A. So you can put your questions in chat. We are a relatively small group, and you can also unmute yourself and ask your question in person if you want to, or make a comment if you have a suggestion, if you know of some of the data that's available that we could not find. We welcome sort of comments and collaboration. But the first question in the chat is from Hamza Sharif Solda, who asks, do we plan to track intra-Central Asian migration, so particularly migration to Kazakhstan, which we already know is particularly the main destination, we could say, for Central Asians. But perhaps we could also add, Uzbekistan, with the strengthening of ties between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan since the death of Karimov. We have seen a number of Tajiks migrating to work in Tashkent, for example, on building sites and other places. So is this something we're interested in looking into? Perhaps it's a matter of the data's availability. But certainly that's an interesting theme that speaks to sort of maybe another overarching trend in the region, which is growing sort of regionalism and the strengthening of ties between the different countries that we've seen in the past 5 or so years at this point. So I don't know if someone on the team wants to take that to start off with. And then we have a question from Professor Schenk that I can see.
I'll quickly answer Hamza's question. Ideally, yes, we should in the future start tracking the inter-regional migration, because as we know, as you had mentioned, it is growing, and Kazakhstan is playing a larger and larger role in that. And particularly for Kyrgyz migrants going to Kazakhstan, as well as interestingly, Turkmen citizens who, as I mentioned, because the routes to Turkey are closely monitored by the government, and Turkmen citizens are often prevented to go to Turkey. One roundabout way of getting to Turkey that Turkmen citizens take is going through Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And reportedly, a lot of them end up just settling in Kazakhstan, finding a job there and staying. So based on the data available in the future, we would like to track inter-regional migration, absolutely.
Fantastic. So certainly, and I guess it's about the availability of data on places like Kazakhstan that I'm not sure is available. But
I want to ask a question, if I may.
Oh, sure, Marhaba, and then we'll have Dr. Schenk.
Hi, my name is Marhaba, and I am from Turkmenistan. I'm a PhD student in sociology at Northeastern University, and I'm doing my doctoral research currently in Turkey. I'm working specifically on Turkmen migration, post-1990s Turkmen migration to Turkmenistan. And of course, thank you for all of your presentations. I enjoyed listening. I kind of like couldn't listen to the first part about the methodology, which I was also interested in, and doing field work. I'm doing like ethnography basically because of the limitations of the statistical data, and that's not my approach basically. So I'm looking at mostly like meso and micro levels, and mostly like doing the ethnography of everyday life, migrant activism, etc. So it's like broadly what I'm doing as a research right now. And I wanted to ask whether you will be kind of like integrating this kind of like ethnographic data or more like meso level, micro level data, because I think it's extremely important, specifically like specifically in the region where we do not have the reliable data, and or like this data is like state sponsored, or so this is why I specifically choose to do ethnography and kind of like through the narratives of the Turkmen migrants, look at this like post 1990s migration. So that was what kind of like migration. Are you like interested in looking into that, or like how are you going to integrate this part into your project? Yeah, thank you.
I don't know who wants to take that question. It's on sort of the use of qualitative data. Okay, well, I'm apparently being told I should take this question. No, I mean, I think we're definitely very interested in incorporating ethnographic and qualitative data in particular, because as you say, I think it's very important to understand you know, the experiences of migration from the perspectives of those who are migrants themselves, and sort of drawing on that sort of research. Certainly something that we're interested in doing. And, you know, I think for our reports going forward, you know, ideally we want to have sort of mixed methods where we can sort of draw upon a combination of sort of what are the sort of macro level trends within the available data, with all its limitations, combined with insights from, you know, the experiences of migrants themselves. And so I think we definitely are keenly aware and sensitive to, you know, the sort of ethnographic approach. And this is a sort of just an initial sort of release of the data, you know, but we definitely would like to collaborate with people. I think it's similar to our protest data, right? We have this big protest data set, but that's like based on, you know, and that's the other thing we're going to release in the new year that I forgot to mention, is we're going to release the latest round of our protest data, and that will have 1,500 protests or so. That's obviously quite a large data set. What we really want to do going forward is combine our efforts with those who are actually, you know, ethnographers and sociologists who are following, you know, protest movements and embedding themselves within them. And, you know, they can provide obviously more fine-grained analysis of particular themes. You know, so I think that's a useful way to combine the data. If the big picture's pointing to certain things, like, you know, increases in migration to South Korea, I think that's one of the fascinating findings. You know, isn't completely original here. I think we had a sense that was happening. Or educational migration to Japan, we can combine that with, you know, I know a PhD student in Japan who's working on the very topic of Uzbek migration to Japan, for example, from the perspective of, as you say, ethnography and sort of doing interviews. So I think they can be combined very usefully in those sort of ways, and that's definitely something we're interested in doing going forward. So it sounds like your research is really fascinating, and look forward to hearing more. But I think Dr. Schenk had her hand up first, and then we have Carolyn after that.
Okay, so thank you. Well, just really well done, guys. This is a great resource, and you've done a really tremendous job. So, I mean, really, 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 this is the first, I think, most comprehensive data set that's brought together various types of immigration data, and especially to these different destinations. And I would say, like, I've worked with parts of this data a lot, and it's really hard to get good comprehensive data. So I think you've all done a really tremendous job of putting this resource together. And I mean, of course, you know the limitations of the data, but those limitations aren't your limitations. Those limitations are the data. I have a sidekick today. The limitations are of the government data, the official data, right? And that's what's actually, I think, really interesting here, because what this data set shows is the official data that the data set, or that the government's kind of the picture that the governments want want to show, right? So I think in that sense, like this tool can really help us to identify data gaps and kind of framings by different governments. And I think that's really valuable. I just have a couple, sorry, I might be abusing my spot, but I just have a few comments to make. I think that probably the strengths of this data set is to compare over time within countries, right? When governments are using, as Sher mentioned in the very beginning, the Russian government changes their methodology. And so that reduces our ability to compare across methodologies. But when a government is using the same methodology, obviously we can compare over time, and that's really useful, right? To see and track trends. I think this data set allows us to, in a way that we haven't been able to before, compare across types of migration from, single countries. So I think that is, I've never really looked at that data before. I think that this data set really offers some valuable abilities to do that. One thing that I would like to, suggest maybe as you're going forward is to think about how you can contribute to estimating informal migration. I know that that's really hard, but I think one of the problems is that is not a priority of any of these governments. It's not a priority, and in fact, yeah, I mean, there's lots of data that just simply falls through, lots of migrants that simply fall through the cracks because the government isn't interested in tracking them. So, I mean, for one example would be like Kyrgyz labor migrants after 2015 in Russia, right? Because they have a different legal system now. What happens? Well, they just fall out of the data. And same for most all labor migrants into Kazakhstan. They just aren't in the data because there's not a legal category to capture them. So I think if you can contribute to kind of thinking about how better to capture those migrants, that would be a really huge contribution. And then I want to just one last thing, affirm this new direction of migration patterns to South Korea. So here in Nur-Sultan, we last week did this presentation of this report by Boltaga Zarhisheva. She's the director of the Общественное мнение research firm here in Nur-Sultan, and she just did this report that's available. I can send it out to people. And I think this is a really up and coming topic, so that you guys have absolutely hit on something really important here that is starting to kind of come up in pockets. We have a couple of students here at Nazarbayev University that are studying these trends to South Korea. So yeah, so overall, really well done. Thanks, guys. This is really important work, and you've done a great job. Thanks.
Dr. Sheng, thank you so much. Just to for your kind words, I personally throughout the project kept pestering Ed if we could talk to you. Kept telling him, "Are we being crazy? Can Dr. Sheng help us? Do we know what we're doing?"
Anytime.
So it means a lot.
Anytime.
Thank you so much.
Send me an email anytime.
Fantastic. I think we had Carolyn had a question.
Yeah, hi. Yes, just let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Carolyn Mertens. I'm a PhD student at the university in Munich, where I'm also based. I work on Tajikistan and actually more precisely on the Pamirs. So my question is related to that, and maybe also points a bit to the question of how much and how far you can also cover differences within the region. So, like, I think the migration within Tajikistan is very different. And what I only know is like it's very different for people coming from the Pamirs, at least those that have an Ismaili background, than most of other Tajiks outside of the region, because Ismailis have actually access also in various degrees, but to institutional support and by the Aga Khan Foundation or those development agencies that come with it. So I think the migration patterns in the Pamirs are very different from the rest of the country. And my question would be, is there a chance to also make this visible, and not only for Tajikistan, but also for the other countries that you're working on, to have those regional differences that are also very much, I think, rooted in structural differences. In that case, it comes with different religious background, and then with an access or non-access to resources that allow people to travel, to receive stipends and so on. Yeah, maybe also more question for Sher.
Thank you so much. This is a fascinating question. I personally have never seen any data that would help us track migration within Tajikistan. All I can say on that topic is from my personal experiences growing up in Tajikistan and sort of constantly being surrounded by friends whose families are from the regions and who, you know, constantly consider either migrating within Tajikistan looking for a better life or migrating outside. All I know, absolutely anecdotally, we would have to like try and get some sort of data on that. Places like Isfara and Garm, for example, contribute a lot to migration of Tajiks to Russia. Places like Panjakent as well. While within the Pamirs, as far as I know, the first step is always to migrate to Khorog from, say, places like Darvaz and places like Ishkashim, and only from there you start considering going further and going to the capital of the country, or Kulob, which is much closer than Dushanbe. However, again, I don't think I've ever seen any studies looking at the inner Tajikistan migration, and I personally would love to look into that. And if you're studying that, you know, if we could, I'd love to see your work, and I'd love to work with you on that personally.
I'm happy to get in touch with you.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a question that's also relevant for other countries. You know, like thinking of like ethnic Uzbek populations in southern Kyrgyzstan. You know, we've done some surveys last year that were unfortunately unpublished by USAID that sort of pointed to differing migration patterns between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz. For example, going to different destinations, different cities in Russia, for example. You know, so I think it's really fascinating. I guess there are some surveys by the IOM and other organizations that point to some of the differences, differing patterns of migration based on different areas of each country. We have, I guess, probably time for a final question. That's from Alexander Meyer, who's also joining us, and another expert and PhD student working on migration. So fantastic to have him as well here. And he's asking whether we've looked at statistics provided by the migrants' country of origin, and to what extent they differ from the statistics provided by the country of the country receiving the migrants. You know, this is something I guess we've seen with remittance data, where, you know, for example, the Kyrgyz National Bank's figure on remittances is the way they count remittances is different, and so we had a different figure, for example, with a more modest fall in remittances recorded by the Kyrgyz National Bank as opposed to the Russian National Bank figures, Russian Central Bank figures. So if anyone wants to take this question.
I mean, I could speak on that when it comes to Tajikistan.
I don't think we can hear you, Sher, for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
That's you, Ed.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Sher, we can hear you. I think it's on Ed's Ed, actually.
So I can speak a little bit to that when it comes to Tajikistan. As I was researching migration of my native country, I tried to look at the government agencies and the statistics that they have. The problem is that, at least for Tajikistan, so I looked for the Ministry of Education statistics that is available, and the Ministry of Education provides general numbers of how many students they think are currently abroad studying in different countries. However, because there's no, oftentimes there's no country by country breakdown of those general statistics, it makes it difficult for us to compare statistics provided by the Tajik government to statistics coming from, you know, Russia, South Korea, and what have you. So there are a lot of limitations, at least on the Tajik government side, when it comes to statistics.
I guess that speaks to sort of, yeah, another sort of interesting vector sort of raised by Dr. Schenk earlier, related to sort of different ways of counting, different ways of using this as a way to compare to, you know, the level of informal migration, to, you know, compare different ways of sort of measuring migration. So that might be certainly something we can look into going forward. We're about at time, so I want to congratulate the team for what has been a fantastic and rigorous effort to put together this data set and put together this report. It really was their work, and that's partly sort of, you know, what we want to do with Oxus, which is to provide a platform to very talented researchers and individuals to design and sort of implement their own research. So looking forward to continuing to work with this team on this report and others, and to incorporate some of your questions and comments going forward. If you are interested in contributing to our website, you know, seemingly many people in the audience I know are working on really fascinating and fantastic themes. You know, we do sort of publish shorter blog posts, short articles on different themes related to research. So please get in touch if you're interested in writing a short piece for us. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the team.